Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim walked into the Great Hall where all the alien leaders sat waiting for him. His black suit was neat and clean, but his face looked tired from years of these same meetings. The room was huge with walls that reached up so high you could not see the top. Hundreds of different alien creatures filled the seats around a giant circular table that sparkled like it was made of diamonds. The Valari delegate was already talking when Hyunwoo sat down. She looked like a giant octopus with purple skin and 8 long arms that moved around as she spoke. Her voice came through the translator machine as a whiny complaining sound that made Hyunwoo want to cover his ears. "Humans are too loud," she said, waving her tentacles in the air. "They build their cities too fast and their ships fly too quickly through our space. We need rules to control them before they take over everything." Next to her sat a Nexari, who looked like he was made entirely of blue crystal. Light bounced off his body and created pretty patterns on the walls as he nodded in agreement. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The humans expand too much," he said. "They want to build colonies everywhere and they do not ask permission first. This is not how civilized species should behave. We must make laws to stop this dangerous behavior." Hyunwoo had heard these same words 1,000 times before. Every week he came to this place and listened to the same complaints from the same aliens who never wanted to do anything except talk and make rules. For 15 long years, he had sat in this chair trying to explain why humans needed to grow and explore, and build new homes for their people. Earth was crowded with too many people and not enough space. The human colonies were not just places where people lived for fun. They were necessary for survival. But the aliens did not understand this. They had lived on their home planets for thousands of years and never needed to find new places to live. Dr. Yujin Park, who sat next to Hyunwoo, leaned forward to speak. She was a smart woman with short black hair and glasses that made her look very serious. She had been trying to warn these aliens about real dangers for years, but they never listened to her either. "Honorable delegates," she said in her calm voice, "while we sit here arguing about colony permits, the Devourers have destroyed 3 more star systems. Our sensors detected the attacks just yesterday. Should we not focus on stopping this threat instead of worrying about how fast human ships travel?" The room became very quiet. Nobody liked to talk about the Devourers because they were scary and dangerous. The Devourers were machines that ate entire planets and turned everything into more machines like themselves. They had been moving slowly across the galaxy for many years, eating up worlds and killing billions of people. The Valari delegate shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her purple skin turned a darker color, which meant she was nervous. "The Devourer situation requires careful study," she said. "We cannot act without proper planning. Maybe in 10 years, when our research committee finishes their investigation, we can decide what to do." 10 years. Hyunwoo closed his eyes and felt anger building in his chest. 10 years meant 10 more years of people dying while these aliens had meetings about having meetings. Captain Minho Lee was out there right now fighting Devourer scouts with old weapons and no support. Engineer So Young Choi had been begging for permission to build better defenses for 5 years, but the council kept saying no. "But we have more important matters to discuss today," said the Nexari delegate. His crystal body chimed like bells as he moved. "Humanity must accept new restrictions immediately. They can only build 1 new colony every 10 years. They must reduce their military ships by 60%, and they must stop all research into advanced weapons right now." Hyunwoo opened his eyes and stared at the crystal alien. These demands were impossible. Earth needed new colonies to house their growing population. Their military protected not just human space, but often defended alien worlds when the local forces were too weak. Their weapons research was the only thing keeping the Devourers from advancing faster. Around the table, other aliens nodded in approval. The gas creature from Vortan made sounds like wind through a tunnel. The rock people from Granite Prime clicked their approval. The bird-like Althini chirped and sang in their musical language. All of them agreed that humans were the problem and needed to be controlled. For 15 years, Hyunwoo had tried to work with these people. He had compromised and negotiated and begged them to see reason. He had watched good people like Diplomat Jin Suk-nam grow old and bitter in these halls. He had seen Earth's brightest minds waste their talents trying to get permission for things that should have been done years ago. The worst part was that humans could solve the Devourer problem if they were allowed to try. Dr. Yujin Park's research team had ideas for new weapons that could stop the machines. Admiral Taeho Jung's fleet knew how to fight them effectively. Engineer So Young Choi had plans for defenses that could protect entire systems. But every time they asked for permission, the council said no. We must be cautious, the aliens always said. We need more studies. We cannot risk making the situation worse. Meanwhile, more worlds burned and more people died, and the Devourers grew stronger every day. Hyunwoo thought about his grandson back on Earth. The boy was only 8 years old, but he often asked his grandfather why the aliens would not let humans help stop the bad machines. Hyunwoo never knew what to tell him. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults are too scared or too stubborn to do the right thing? The debate continued around the table. More complaints about human expansion. More demands for restrictions. More excuses for why they could not act against the real threats. Hyunwoo listened to voices that never changed, saying words that meant nothing, while real people suffered real consequences. Suddenly, he had enough. After 15 years of this nonsense, he could not sit quietly anymore while bureaucrats debated the lives of billions. He stood up slowly and the entire room fell silent. All the alien eyes and sensors and whatever they used to see turned toward him. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the steel underneath. No, he said. The word echoed in the vast chamber like thunder. The aliens looked confused. In 15 years of meetings, no human had ever simply refused a council directive. They were used to humans who begged and pleaded and compromised. They had never heard a human say no and mean it. I beg your pardon, stammered the Valari delegate. Her tentacles twisted together nervously. Hyunwoo looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. He thought about Captain Minho Lee fighting impossible odds. He thought about Dr. Yujin Park, whose brilliant ideas were ignored. He thought about his grandson and all the human children who deserved a future free from the Devourer threat. I said no, he repeated clearly. Humanity withdraws from this council effective immediately. We will no longer participate in this charade while real threats destroy innocent worlds. We are done asking permission to save lives. The room erupted in chaos as aliens shouted and chittered and made whatever sounds their species used to express shock. But Hyunwoo was already walking toward the door with Dr. Yujin Park beside him. Behind them, they left a council that had forgotten how to act, and ahead of them lay a future where humans would be free to do what needed to be done. Admiral Taeho Jung was standing on the bridge of his flagship when the message arrived from Earth. His uniform was dirty from 3 days of fighting against Devourer scout ships near the Kepler system. The enemy machines had been testing human defenses for weeks, and his fleet was tired from constant battles. The communication screen lit up with Ambassador Hyunwoo's face. The old diplomat looked different now. There was fire in his eyes that Taeho had never seen before. The message began to play, and every person on the bridge stopped what they were doing to listen. Attention all human forces and colonies, said Hyunwoo. The Terran Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately. We are no longer bound by their restrictions, quotas, or regulations. All human military units are hereby authorized to engage threats at their discretion. All colonies are free to expand and develop according to their needs. Earth sends this message. To all our people, we trust you to do what is right. Taeho smiled for the first time in months. For years he had been forced to fight defensive battles against the Devourers because council rules said humans could not launch offensive attacks. His ships had the firepower to strike deep into enemy territory, but he was not allowed to use it. Now those chains were broken. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Jae-won Kim, who was barely 20 years old, but had already proven himself in battle. Send word to all fleet commanders, he ordered. We are no longer fighting, with our hands tied behind our backs. Prepare for offensive operations against Devourer positions. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of New Busan, Governor Kyung-min Han was reading the same message in his office. Outside his window, he could see the half-finished orbital defense platforms that had been stopped by council regulations. The aliens had said the platforms were too militaristic and could be used to threaten peaceful species. The governor was a practical woman who had spent her whole life building things. She knew her people needed those defense platforms to protect themselves from pirates and raiders. More importantly, they would be crucial if the Devourers ever attacked their system. She picked up her communication device and called the construction chief. "Start the work again," she told him. "Build those platforms as fast as you can. We do not need permission anymore." All across human space, the news spread like wildfire. Colony governors who had been waiting years for approval to expand their settlements suddenly found themselves free to grow. Military commanders who had been forced to follow outdated council battle procedures could now fight the way they knew worked. Best Dr. Eugene Park returned to Earth and went straight to her laboratory. For decades, she had been forced to abandon promising research projects because the council deemed them too dangerous. Her team had developed faster-than-light communication systems that could connect the entire galaxy instantly. They had created new weapons that could punch through Devourer armor like paper. They had even figured out how to generate energy shields that could protect entire planets. All of these projects had been banned or restricted by alien bureaucrats who were afraid of human technology. Now Dr. Park gathered her research teams and told them the good news. They could finally work on the projects that really mattered instead of wasting time on council-approved busy work. The experimental communication system came online first. Within hours, human colonies that had been isolated for months could talk to each other instantly. Military commanders could coordinate their actions across vast distances. Scientists could share discoveries immediately instead of waiting for council approval to transmit data. Captain Min-Ho Lee commanded a small battle group that had been playing cat and mouse with Devourer forces for years. The council had ordered him to maintain a non-aggressive posture, which meant he could only fight when the enemy attacked first. This stupid rule had cost many good people their lives as they waited for permission to defend themselves properly. Now, Min-Ho gathered his squadron commanders around a holographic display, showing Devourer positions. "These machine clusters here and here," he said, pointing to red dots on the map, "have been building up their forces for months. Under council rules, we would have to wait for them to attack us first. But we are not following council rules anymore." His officers smiled grimly. They had been waiting for this day for years. Finally, they could take the fight to the enemy instead of always reacting to Devourer attacks. Min-Ho began planning humanity's first real offensive against the mechanical plague that had terrorized the galaxy for so long. On colony worlds throughout human space, people looked up at the stars with new hope in their hearts. Engineer So Young Choi, who ran the massive Titan shipyards, had been forced to build slow cargo ships and peaceful research vessels because the council said military ships were too aggressive. Now she could finally design the warships and defensive platforms that human space desperately needed. Her first project was to retrofit existing cargo ships with weapons and shields. Merchant vessels that had been helpless against pirates would now be able to defend themselves. Colony ships would carry defensive systems that could protect settlers during their long journeys to new worlds. Even exploration ships would have the tools they needed to survive in dangerous parts of the galaxy. Every human settlement began preparing for independence. They knew they could no longer rely on council protection because the council had never protected anyone from real threats. Anyway, instead they would have to depend on themselves and their fellow humans. This was scary but also exciting because humans had always been good at taking care of themselves. The aliens watched this sudden burst of human activity with growing fear. Emergency council sessions were called every day. Threat assessments were hastily written and rewritten as alien bureaucrats tried to understand what was happening. Never before in council history had a member species simply walked away from their authority. The precedent was terrifying for the aliens. If humans could ignore council rules, then maybe other species would do the same thing. The careful system of committees and regulations that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries might collapse entirely. "They cannot simply leave," insisted the Nexari representative, his crystal body glowing bright red with anger. "There are procedures and protocols to follow. They must file the proper withdrawal documentation and wait for approval from the Oversight Committee." But humanity was already gone. Their embassy ships had departed council space with remarkable speed, leaving behind only empty offices and a simple message. The message was short and direct, just like humans preferred their communication to be. "Humanity thanks the council for their efforts, but will now handle galactic threats in our own way." The words seemed innocent enough, but they carried a threat that made alien leaders nervous. What did humans mean by their own way? What would they do now that council restrictions no longer applied to them? Most importantly, would other species follow their example and abandon the council system entirely? Within weeks, the first answers began to arrive. Human military forces launched coordinated strikes against devourer positions. Human colonies began expanding at unprecedented rates. Human scientists started sharing technology that had been banned for decades. The galaxy was about to see what humans could accomplish when they were finally free to act according to their own judgment, instead of alien bureaucracy. 6 months after humanity walked away from the council, the galaxy began to see what humans could really do when nobody was holding them back. Captain Min-Ho Lee stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last Devourer manufacturing station explode into brilliant orange fire. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Jae-won Kim, was grinning as he reported the successful destruction of 3 enemy facilities in just 1 week. "Sir," the young officer said, his voice filled with excitement, "we have eliminated more Devourer infrastructure in the past month than the Council managed to destroy in 10 years. The enemy is actually retreating from our advance." Min-Ho nodded with satisfaction. The secret to their success was simple speed and coordination. While Council forces spent months planning single operations and filling out forms, human commanders made decisions in hours. When scouts reported Devourer movements, response fleets launched immediately, instead of waiting for committee approval that might never come. The new tactics developed by strategist Colonel Yoon-hee Park had revolutionized space warfare. Instead of the slow, methodical battles that aliens preferred, humans used quick strike teams that hit hard and disappeared before the enemy could respond. They attacked multiple targets simultaneously, forcing the Devourers to spread their forces thin. Most importantly, they shared information instantly through Dr. Yoo-jin Park's quantum communication network. Back on Earth, Dr. Park herself was celebrating breakthrough after breakthrough in her research laboratories. The quantum communication system now connected every human world, allowing instant coordination across vast distances. New weapon systems based on controlled antimatter reactions gave human ships firepower that shocked even the most advanced alien observers. Her teams had even cracked the secret of Devourer replication, discovering how to disrupt their self-construction process. The most important discovery was understanding how the machine plague reproduced itself. Dr. Park and her team had spent years studying captured Devourer fragments despite Council restrictions on such research. Now they knew exactly which frequencies could scramble the enemy programming and prevent new machines from being built. "We can not only destroy them," she explained to a gathering of military commanders, "but we can also prevent them from replacing their losses. For the first time since the Devourer threat began, we are winning this war." On the frontier, colonies that had struggled under Council quotas were transforming into thriving centers of innovation and growth. Governor Hye-jin Lim watched from her office window as construction crews worked around the clock building new cities on her world. Without Council restrictions limiting development, her people had built more in 6 months than they had managed in the previous 5 years. The orbital defense platforms were complete and functioning perfectly. Manufacturing facilities that had been banned as too militaristic were now producing everything the colony needed, from food processing equipment to medical supplies. Most importantly, her world was attracting settlers from across human space who wanted to be part of something new and exciting. Captain Subino led the assault that freed the ancient Altani homeworld from Devourer occupation. The bird-like aliens had been refugees for over 50 years after machines consumed their planet and turned it into a factory for producing more Devourers. Council forces had declared the world impossible to recapture, but human forces liberated it in just 3 days. The grateful Altani sang victory songs that could be heard across their reclaimed cities. Their musical language created beautiful harmonies as they celebrated the return to their ancestral home. Many of them volunteered to serve alongside human forces, saying they wanted to help other species escape the fate that had befallen them. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Devourers were not advancing. Instead, they were retreating, pulling back from systems they had held for decades. Human forces pressed their advantage, liberating world after world and rescuing populations that had been written off as lost causes by the Council. But it was not just military victories that demonstrated humanity's new capabilities. When plague struck the Zephyrian colonies, human medical ships arrived within days instead of the months it would have taken Council bureaucrats to approve assistance. Dr. Shung Ho Yang and his medical teams worked tirelessly to develop treatments that saved millions of lives. The Zephyrians were amazed by human efficiency. Their own government had requested Council aid 6 months earlier, but had been told that medical assistance required approval from multiple committees. Meanwhile, their people were dying from a disease that human doctors cured in less than a week. When pirate fleets began threatening the peaceful Luminar trade routes, Admiral Ji Hyun Kang dispatched patrol groups that eliminated the threat in a matter of weeks. The slug-like Luminars had been paying tribute to pirates for years, because Council forces were too slow and bureaucratic to provide effective protection. Now Luminar merchant ships traveled safely under human protection. Their trade routes flourished, and their economy grew stronger than it had been in decades. Many Luminar captains began flying human flags on their ships as a symbol of gratitude and protection. The rescued species began talking among themselves in ways they had never done before. Why had the Council forbidden such effective action, they asked each other. Why had they been forced to suffer under threats that humans could eliminate so easily? Most importantly, why had the Council spent so much effort restricting humanity instead of learning from their methods? Ambassador Byung-Soo Na found himself fielding discreet inquiries from alien governments who wondered if they too might benefit from human assistance. Species that had voted to restrict humanity were now secretly asking for human protection. Governments that had condemned human expansion were now begging humans to establish colonies in their territories. The proud Theronian Empire, which had been among the strongest supporters of anti-human restrictions, quietly requested military advisors to help them deal with pirates in their outer systems. The crystalline Nexari, who had demanded limits on human research, began asking for access to human medical technology. Even the gas-dwelling Vortans, who had complained about human ships moving too fast through their territory, started requesting human patrol vessels to protect their trade convoys. The Council grew increasingly desperate as they watched their authority crumble. They issued sanctions against humanity, but human colonies were already self-sufficient and did not need Council trade. They threatened military action, but their own forces were poorly equipped and trained compared to human forces that had been forged in real combat against the Devourers. Most disturbing of all, other species began following humanity's example. The warrior clans of Valdris announced their withdrawal from Council authority, choosing instead to ally directly with human forces. The scientific communes of the Outer Rim declared independence, seeking to work with human researchers rather than Council bureaucrats who stifled innovation with endless regulations. The careful order that had maintained galactic peace through inaction and bureaucracy was crumbling. In its place, something new was emerging, a loose alliance of species that valued action over discussion and results over process. At its center stood humanity, no longer begging for permission, but leading by example and showing the galaxy what was possible when good people were free to do what was right. The Galactic Council called an emergency session, but this time they were the ones asking for help. Councillor Veltar of the proud Theronian Empire stood before a half-empty chamber, many species having followed humanity's lead in abandoning the Council entirely. His forearms trembled as he spoke into the translation device that carried his words across the vast room. The situation has become untenable, he admitted, his voice cracking with shame. The Devourer advance has been completely halted, in sectors now under human protection. Meanwhile, our own territories continue to fall at an alarming rate. We have lost 12 core worlds in the past month. A lone Fleet Admiral Dong Hyun Shin listened from the observation gallery, no longer bound. By diplomatic protocol, Earth had sent him not as a supplicant, but as an equal offering assistance. Beside him sat General Hae Young-seo, whose rapid response forces had become legendary among alien populations. Her soldiers could deploy to any crisis zone within hours instead of the months it took Council forces to mobilize. The truth was undeniable, and everyone in the chamber knew it. In 18 months since humanity's withdrawal, they had accomplished more than the Council had managed in decades. The devourer threat, once considered an inevitable extinction event, had been reduced to a manageable problem. Human-protected space had become a haven of prosperity and security that attracted refugees from across the galaxy. We have received formal request for protection from 47 council member species continued. Councillor Veltar, his pride clearly wounded by having to make such admissions. They no longer trust council forces to defend them. They want human protection, human technology. Human leadership Dr. Chang Ho-Yoon, now head of Earth's Xenological Research Division, had documented this transformation carefully. Species that had once dismissed humanity as too aggressive now begged for human military advisors. Governments that had condemned human expansion now sought human engineers to develop their worlds. The same aliens who had demanded restrictions on human research were now desperately trying to acquire human technology. The most dramatic example was the recent plague outbreak on Nexari Prime. The crystalline beings had always prided themselves on their advanced medical knowledge, but when a deadly virus began killing their people, they could not find a cure. Their own scientists worked for months without success, while the death toll climbed higher every day. Human medical teams led by Dr. Sung-Ho Yang arrived within 72 hours of being contacted. They brought experimental treatments that had been banned by council regulations. The cure was distributed freely, and the plague was eliminated in less than a week. The grateful Nexari government immediately petitioned to join human-protected space. But it was the devourer situation that truly exposed the council's complete failure. The machine plague had been advancing slowly but steadily for over a century, while alien bureaucrats debated appropriate responses. Now the devourers had made their final desperate gamble, concentrating all their remaining forces for one massive assault on the council. Core Worlds Captain Yanwu Zhou had detected the enemy fleet buildup 3 weeks before the alien sensors registered anything unusual. Human intelligence networks built on speed and efficiency, rather than bureaucratic protocols, had mapped every aspect of the devourer strategy. The machines were bringing everything they had left for one last attempt to break human momentum. The Battle of Centauri Gate should have been the Council's moment of vindication. Their combined fleets outnumbered the attacking devourers, and they were fighting to defend their most important worlds. Instead, it became their greatest humiliation. The Council forces fought bravely, but their outdated tactics and poor coordination made them easy targets for the mechanical enemy. Admiral So Min Kwan's human fleet arrived just as the Council defenses were collapsing. Her tactical brilliance turned what should have been humanity's greatest challenge into the Devourer's final defeat. The battle lasted only 6 hours, but it changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The largest Devourer fleet in recorded history was completely destroyed with minimal human losses. In the aftermath, something unprecedented happened. Alien refugees from the devastated Council worlds were not relocated to camps or processing centers. Instead, human colonies opened their doors, offering homes, jobs, and citizenship to anyone who wanted to rebuild their lives in human space. Engineer Da-Un Lee oversaw the integration programs, ensuring that alien knowledge and culture were preserved and valued. The galaxy watched in amazement as former enemies became neighbors, working together to build something better than what had come before. Theronian warriors served alongside human marines. Zephyrian scientists collaborated with human researchers. Even proud Nexari diplomats learned to appreciate human directness over their own elaborate courtesies. The transformation was not just military or political, but deeply personal. Governor Kyungmin Han welcomed Althani refugees to New Busan, where their musical culture blended beautifully with human creativity. The bird-like aliens taught human children their complex harmonies while learning human engineering techniques that helped them rebuild their shattered civilization. Captain Min-Ho Lee found himself commanding mixed-species crews where humans worked alongside aliens who had once voted to restrict human activities. The former enemies discovered they had more in common than they had ever imagined. Both species valued courage, loyalty, and the willingness to fight for those who could not defend themselves. The Council still existed, but as a shadow of its former self. Most of its former members had joined the growing human commonwealth, a loose federation based on mutual cooperation rather than bureaucratic control. The few species that remained loyal to the old system found themselves increasingly irrelevant, their meetings attended by empty chairs, and their pronouncements ignored by a galaxy that had moved beyond their outdated methods. The most shocking development was when the Valari Prime Minister herself appeared at the Commonwealth Embassy, requesting asylum. Her own people had voted to remove her from office after learning that she had been secretly negotiating with human representatives for months. The tentacled alien who had once demanded restrictions on human expansion now praised human leadership as the galaxy's only hope for survival. "We were wrong," she admitted in a private meeting with Admiral Dong Hyun Shin. "We thought order meant control, and control meant safety. But you have shown us that true order comes from people being free to do what is right. Safety comes not from rules and restrictions, but from having strong friends who will stand beside you when darkness falls." The Admiral nodded respectfully. The Commonwealth was not about human dominance, but about human vision, a future where species worked together, because they chose to, not because they were forced to. It was about trusting people to make good decisions instead of assuming they needed to be controlled and regulated. As news of the Council's collapse spread across the galaxy, more species announced their intention to join the Commonwealth. The warrior clans of Valdris brought their military expertise. The scientific communes offered their research capabilities. Even some of the most conservative alien governments began making discreet inquiries about membership requirements. The galaxy that had once watched in fear as humanity walked away from the table, now watched in hope as they built something better. The Commonwealth represented not conquest but cooperation, not domination but partnership. It was proof that when good people were free to act according to their conscience, amazing things became possible. The old order was dying, and in its place something new and wonderful was being born. 5 years after humanity walked away from the table, Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim stood once again in a great chamber filled with representatives from across the galaxy. But this was not the old council chambers with their rigid protocols and endless debates. This was the Commonwealth Assembly on New Geneva, where decisions were made quickly and action followed immediately. The aged diplomat smiled as he watched the proceedings. Species that had once barely tolerated each other now worked as partners and friends. The Valdris warrior clan served alongside human marines, protecting trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for decades. Zephyrian scientists collaborated with human researchers, developing new technologies that benefited everyone. Even former council hardliners had joined, drawn by the Commonwealth's remarkable success in solving problems that had seemed impossible. Captain Min-Ho Lee, now Admiral of the Commonwealth Defense Force, stood at the central podium, reporting on the final cleanup operations against scattered devourer remnants. What had once been an existential threat that kept entire civilizations awake at night was now reduced to minor piracy easily handled by local defense forces. The last devourer manufacturing facility was destroyed yesterday, he announced to the assembled delegates. Our combined forces eliminated the final nest of machines hiding in the Vega system. The threat that plagued our galaxy for over a century has been completely eliminated. The chamber erupted in celebration. Not the polite applause of diplomatic protocol, but genuine joy from beings who had lived under the shadow of extinction for their entire lives. Some delegates wept openly, remembering lost homeworlds and fallen friends. Others sang victory songs in their native languages, creating a beautiful harmony that filled the vast hall. Dr. Eugene Park, her hair now silver, but her eyes still bright with curiosity, outlined the new technologies being shared freely among Commonwealth worlds. The quantum communication network that had given humanity such an advantage in the war was now available to every member species. Scientific discoveries that had been restricted by council bureaucracy were being distributed to anyone who could benefit from them. We no longer hoard knowledge or restrict research, she explained to the gathered representatives. Our greatest strength comes from sharing what we know and learning from each other. The medical breakthrough achieved by Nexari, researchers last month, has already saved thousands of human lives. The engineering innovations developed on Theronian worlds are being used to build better ships throughout the Commonwealth. Governor Kyung-Min Han spoke for the colonial worlds, describing the remarkable prosperity that had followed their liberation from council restrictions. New Busan alone now housed 12 different species living and working together in harmony. Its orbital cities gleamed like jewels against the stars, while its Surface teemed with farms and factories that supplied goods throughout the sector. The most remarkable transformation had occurred on worlds that had been devastated by war or disaster. The Althini homeworld, liberated from devourer occupation, had been rebuilt into something more beautiful than it had ever been before. Human engineers worked alongside Althini artists to create cities that were both functional and inspiring. Birdsong mixed with human music in public spaces, where different species gathered to share meals and stories. But perhaps the most surprising speaker was Councillor Veltar himself. The proud Theronian had been among the last to abandon the old council, but even he could not deny the evidence before him. The Commonwealth had achieved in 5 years what the council had failed to accomplish in centuries. His forearms gestured gracefully as he addressed the assembly. When humanity walked away from our table, he said, his translator working smoothly with concepts that had once been impossible to express. We thought they were abandoning their responsibilities to galactic civilization. We were wrong. They were showing us what responsibility truly meant. The former enemies had become the greatest advocates for human leadership. Species that had once demanded restrictions on human expansion now begged them to establish colonies in their territories. Governments that had condemned human military buildup now sought protection under the Commonwealth banner. The Nexari representative, a being of living crystal whose body sparkled with rainbow light, stood to address the assembly. We spent centuries debating the proper way to respond to threats while our people suffered and died. Humanity showed us that sometimes the proper response is simply to act. The time for talking ends when innocent lives are at stake. Engineer. So young Choi, now in charge of Commonwealth shipbuilding, had just unveiled plans for the next generation of exploration vessels. No longer content to simply defend what they had, humanity and their allies were preparing to push beyond the known galaxy, seeking new worlds and new challenges. The ships being built in the Titan yards were marvels of cooperative engineering. Human hull designs, incorporated Theronian armor plating, Nexari crystal matrices powered the engines, while Valdris weapon systems provided protection. Zephyrian navigation computers guided them through space using star maps compiled by dozens of species working together. Dr. Chang Ho-Yoon presented his latest research on galactic expansion possibilities. Long-range sensors had detected signs of other civilizations beyond the current boundaries of known space. Some showed signs of technological advancement, while others appeared to be struggling with their own versions of threats like the Devourers. The Commonwealth fleet stands ready to make contact, he announced. Our mission will be one of friendship and assistance, not conquest. We have learned that the galaxy becomes safer and more prosperous when civilizations work together, rather than competing or fighting. Admiral Dong Hyun Shin outlined the new defense structure that protected Commonwealth space, instead of the rigid hierarchical system preferred by the old council. The new approach was flexible and responsive. Local forces handled routine problems while rapid response teams could be deployed anywhere within hours for serious threats. Every world contributes according to its abilities, he explained. Some provide ships and soldiers, others offer scientific research or manufacturing capabilities. Still others serve as refugees for displaced populations or training centers for new recruits. The important thing is that everyone participates in protecting what we have all built together. The assembly session concluded with a moment of silence for those who had died during the dark years when the galaxy struggled under ineffective leadership. Then delegates filed out to return to their worlds, carrying with them not just the decisions made that day, but the knowledge that they were part of something unprecedented in galactic history. Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim remained in the chamber after most others had left. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the endless frustration of council meetings where nothing ever got done, the moment of decision when humanity chose action over discussion, the fear and uncertainty of those first months when they stood alone against the galaxy. Now children of a dozen species played together in Commonwealth schools, learning languages and customs from across the galaxy. Former enemies worked side by side, building a future that none of them could have imagined alone. The galaxy that had once feared human ambition now could not imagine existing without human leadership. The old man smiled as he walked toward the exit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but he was no longer worried. The Commonwealth had proven that when good people were free to do what was right, amazing things became possible. The future belonged not to any single species, but to all of them working together toward something better than any of them could achieve alone in the EI. And humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force or cunning. They had won it by walking away from a broken system and showing everyone else what was possible when people were trusted to make their own decisions. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.